Hey everyone, my name is Chris Green, and in this video, if you give me just a few minutes of your time, I guarantee you we're going to be able to level up your skills using Presonus Studio One. Now let's get started. All right, my first tip to you is how you navigate presets in Presonus Studio One. So let's say you have an instance of Impact loaded, and you've got a drum groove that you're really happy with. You like the groove itself, but you want to change the preset. Well, one way you might go about doing it is going up to the Presets tab, clicking, finding a kit, and then clicking it. It loads a new kit. You hit spacebar and you listen. Well, there's a quicker way for you to navigate your presets. I'm going to let the drum groove play, and what I'm going to hit on my keyboard using a Mac keyboard is Option, then Page Down. If you use Option, Page Down, or Option, Page Up, you can change the presets easily while the drum groove is playing. Let's take a listen. Now, when it comes to virtual instruments and drum grooves like this, a way to really make it sound a little bit more dynamic is to mess with the velocity. So if I have the edit window open, select whatever MIDI region or drum groove you're working with. I can highlight all of these hi-hat hits right here, just clicking and dragging with the pointer tool. And then down at the bottom, I have the velocity tab. I can take all of these hits, I can bring them down to about 50%. Not only that, I can select certain ones holding the shift key to give it a more like randomized effect. I can just grab a few of these over here, and now I can bring the velocity of these up. And if you want to, you can hit the 3 key again with the painter tool, and you can go into the velocities region, and you can really make them sound a little bit more randomized just by clicking and dragging across. And of course, it's not just limited to the hi-hat. This will work on all sorts of virtual instruments as long as it is a MIDI instrument in Studio One. Here on screen, you'll see a relatively simple song. This is just an acoustic mix, but when you're looking at this session, I might be asking you, okay, where's the intro, where's the verse, where's the chorus? And rather than going through and just hitting the space bar to guess where you're at within the song, there's a better way of staying organized, and that's with the arranger view. If you go up here to this little burger stack next to your Add Tracks button, you can simply select Arranger. When it opens up this arrangement tab, you can double click to add a tab just like you would in some sort of binder. You can zoom in, and using the split tool, this is number 3 on your keyboard, the split tool can go through and you can cut this thing up so that you know exactly where your verses and your choruses are.
Well, this city has my heart, and Lyle is always on my mind.
So now if you're looking at the arranger view, they all look like they're labeled the exact same. Well, if I want to go up here, I can right click any of these tabs. And if I right click any of the tabs, I can go in and change the name of them. So I want this one to be verse 1. I can right click this one here, and I want this to be labeled chorus. Not only that, but while you're changing the name of it, you can also change the color of the tab. So if I want my choruses to be red, they can be red. If I want my verses to be yellow, they can be yellow. It's a great way of staying organized in your session. All right, next I've got my SM7B here on my desk. And let's say I want to record some claps into my audio interface. First thing I would do is hit the T key on my keyboard to create a brand new track. I'm going to call this one Claps. I've got one of them plugged into input 1, and then you may be wondering, do I have the gain set loud enough for my microphone? Well, in Presonus Studio One, if you open up the mix window, look for this icon that has an arrow pointed to the right and then a vertical bar. That'll open up this input metering. This will clearly show me how much level I'm getting into the software. So if I clap my hands, see my claps are coming in with a nice healthy signal. Also, if you're clipping, if your gain's turned up too loud, you got a nice indication there that if you see that red bar, you know that you've clipped your signal and you need to turn the gain down in your audio interface. Now, speaking of your input metering, you can actually change what this metering is showing you. You can get a whole lot more detail if you just go in to fine tune some settings. Right click anywhere that it has a meter and you've got your peak value listed. The peak value is that blue bar that we're so used to seeing. You can change it to where it also shows you peak and RMS. RMS is going to be that horizontal line that looks almost kind of yellow-orange color. It's going to be floating. That's an average volume of your track. If I clap my hands, you can see that the peak value goes very high because it's very quick and instantaneous. The RMS value kind of hovers a little bit longer. And of course, you can go in and change how long the RMS level is staying. You can change it to a peak hold. With peak hold, I'll get a light blue horizontal bar. It stays in place for quite some time. You can set it to where it stays up there for infinity. I don't know why you would use that, but anyway, if you want to check all your metering in Presonus Studio One, make sure you right click and adjust these settings as needed. A lot of times on virtual instruments and software plugins as well, I like starting with a default preset, but I go in and inevitably I make some sort of fine-tuned settings. I want to change the EQ or make it fit my song a little bit better. But what happens when you change that preset? Well, when you change the preset, you'll notice this little asterisk appears up at the preset menu. You can save all of your settings on your plugins and your virtual instruments, and it really comes in handy if you're trying to recall. So anytime you want to save, go up to next to the presets button. There is a save setting. It looks like a little document folder, and you want to click Store Preset. If I store the preset, I'm met with this other window, and this window is going to ask me what do I want to call my preset. So I'm going to call this one Georgia Session Pad. You can give a description if you're not sure what that title is meaning, like if you need to give some more clarification to it. Then you can also go in and create a subfolder. So the subfolder, I'm going to name it this song, which is called the Georgia Sessions. So now anytime I move in, if I want to start a brand new session, but I want to bring back that pad that I used from the Georgia session, I can simply click my preset window, and down here I've got a folder labeled the Georgia Sessions. I can click the Georgia Session Pad, and it will load all of my settings without me having to tweak anything ever again. Not only can you save presets of your plugin settings, but you can actually save an entire signal chain if it has multiple plugins loaded. So here on this lead vocal track of my wife singing Georgia Sessions, next to the Inserts tab on the Inspector window, I can go in and click this downward facing arrow. And if I click this, I can go to Store Effects Chain. What that's going to do is it's going to save the EQ settings that I have for her vocal, and it's also going to save the compressor settings I have for her vocal. Any plugin that I have loaded on that track, I can simply recall it. So I'm going to call this one Lana Lead Vocal. And again, the subfolder, I'm typically just going to go with the song that I've been working on. This one's called the Georgia Session. So now if I go in to create a new lead vocal, I'm going to call this one Lead Vocal 2. If I want to store an effects chain, I can simply load the effects chain that we just saved. I can go into the Georgia session, and there I have Lana Lead Vocal. Now, when I create this new track, it's got her EQ settings already dialed in, and it's got her compressor settings already set, saving me a ton of time in the future. All right, now we need to talk about some of your CPU performance specs. So whenever you're creating a new song, you're probably used to seeing this window under Audio Setup where it asks you about your default block size. The thing you need to know about block size is it will have an impact on how your audio sounds. If you try to set your block size to something like 16 samples, you'll notice that the amount of delay or latency is really small. But you'll also notice that the smaller your block size, you'll start to hear all these pops and clicks in your audio. That's because your computer is having to work a little bit harder to process all of the audio and plugins. Now, the more plugins you use, if you're using a lot of guitar amp simulation plugins like the Line 6 Helix, you'll definitely have to set a larger block size. Now, whenever you have a large amount of samples, you're also going to notice a bigger delay, but there are some workarounds. Personally, I find just setting my block size to 512 and leaving it makes it work pretty well, especially if you have an interface that's capable of doing direct monitoring. You should be good to go. Now, on the processing tab, I pretty much always set it to maximum because you're going to have an added benefit of this low latency switch. So the low latency switch, it's this green Z that you see. If you have this thing enabled at the bottom right of your controller, when you have the mix tab open, your main fader, you'll have this Z button. If you click it, basically what it will do is it will switch you into low latency mode. If you're recording electric guitar and you're noticing there's a delay in your signal every time that you're trying to play through plugins, well, you need to go ahead and set your tone that you're going to use for your electric guitar and then switch on low latency mode. The thing you need to know about low latency mode is that if this green switch is on, some of your plugins, like the Line 6 Helix, you can make changes to the pedals, but you won't be able to hear it in your ears. That's because it's kind of frozen that plugin in place. So anytime you're not playing or recording, you need to make sure that this Z is grayed out. But if you're looking for a low latency solution so that you have no delay when you're playing your guitar or any sort of direct instruments, make sure that green Z is on. This will also work with drum sampling. If you're using a controller, any sort of keyboard, flip on the low latency mode as soon as you can. Been talking a lot about virtual instruments. So what if you just want to add a virtual instrument into your session? Open up the Browse tab at the bottom right. Make sure you have the Instruments tab selected and go into your Presonus folder. And most of you out there should have Impact and Presence by default installed on your computer. If you don't, you can go up to Studio One, go to Studio One Installation, and then on the Installations tab, you can look under Available Downloads or Installed Content. If you do have it installed, it should show up under maybe the Artist Library. There's Impact Drum Kits. The Artist Library is quite useful, especially if you're in a pinch and you're just looking for some background music for like a podcast. Go ahead and download the Artist Library, and it will tell you on the right how many gigabytes of storage this is taking up. But once you have it installed, you can just simply click and drag any of your virtual instruments over to an empty slot and it will create a new track. Now, by default, there are no pads, there's no samples loaded, so you do need to go up to your presets and you can load any of these kits that you want. So if I've got this one for minimal techno, if I want to create a groove, I can simply just double click any of this open space down here. If I double click again, now we have that pencil tool piano roll that we're used to seeing from before. By default, it goes to this drum, but if you're used to using a piano roll, like I mentioned, you can simply just click this button here where it has the piano, or you can click the snare drum and you'll be able to see each of these hits right here.
City has my heart in lots of ways.
Here's how I get started with automation really quickly in Presonus Studio One. Here I've got a pad track and I've got the mix window open. I'm going to click on this fader that's right now set to 0 dB. As soon as I click the fader, the next thing I want to do is go up to the top left where it has this A. What it will do is it will automatically create an automation based on whatever I just clicked. This will also work if you're setting an automation for like an EQ. Whatever the last thing you clicked was, if you click the A key up here, that will now become automated. So with this volume key automated, if I want to rise this pad going into the chorus, I can simply go back a few beats. I can make a point right here just by clicking on the blue line. And then right before the chorus, I want to increase this by 10 dB. Let's go crazy with it right now. So going into the chorus, listen to how the pad gets gradually louder and louder and watch the fader at the bottom. You'll see it start to move by itself.
Well, this city has my heart in lots of ways.
Now within your main navigation, if you hit 5 at the top, you'll be using your paint tool. And with the paint tool on an automation track, you can really go in and make these gradual changes that have some flow to them. This will be much more dynamic, certainly useful for pads, but you can also automate this with EQ, compression. Pretty much anything in Studio One can be automated.
Well, this city has.
Now, if you're a beginner to Presonus Studio One, when you're creating a new track, there's a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to what type of track are you adding. You're being asked, are you creating an audio track or an instrument track? Most of the time, you're going to be selecting one of these two here. Now, by audio track, that can also include instruments. What they mean by audio track is like real world instruments. So if I am miking up my voice counts as an audio track. If I'm miking up an acoustic guitar, that acoustic guitar is not counted as an instrument track, it's counted as an audio track. Anything you are recording in the quote unquote real world, that is an audio track. Now, if you are using a MIDI keyboard like the one I have on this desk, all of the sounds are going to be coming from my computer. There are no sounds coming from this keyboard. I'm not miking up this MIDI controller. These sounds are coming from my computer. So if you're using a virtual instrument, if you're using a synthesizer or anything that's supposed to come from your computer, that counts as a MIDI instrument. So you need to start thinking about these more in like analog terms. So this is like analog audio, and the instrument tab is more like MIDI. Here on screen, I've got the Georgia session pulled up and I've got my wife's vocal. Well, we need to talk about event effects. Event effects are effects that are only going to be happening for certain phrases within your track. So let's say I wanted to add a chorus effect to my wife's vocal, but I only want it to be on the verse of the song. So if I take this verse section and I use the split tool using the 3 key on the keyboard, I can make a cut. And if we just listen to the original vocal, this is what the verse sounds like normally.
These city lights aren't like the stars back home.
Okay, if I want to add a chorus effect, I could go in to this and I could add the chorus effect on the signal chain. But if I do that, it's going to have the chorus effect also on her chorus. So another way of working with this is to use what's called event effects. So if you have the inspector tool open, select whatever region you want to add the effect to, and then down at the bottom it has event effects. You want to click enable. If I click this little stack here, I can bring this up. All right, within the event effects, if I want to add a plugin to this audio region, I can go in and add the chorus plugin from Presonus. This will only affect the audio region that I have selected. So if I go crazy with this, I just want to have a really big chorus effect. Let's take a listen.
Will they shed their light on brick?
Now, what's cool about event effects is, again, like I said, as soon as this audio region is done, this event effects will be disabled. So going into the chorus, this is what the vocal sounds like.
Let my bare feet wear out those fields. Well, this city has my heart.
Very useful if you want to have those instantaneous effects that are only happening on short snippets. And then you can go in here to render. If you want to commit what you're doing to that specific phrase, just click the render key, and then that will be printed onto the track itself. For those of you that are using Studio One and you find that it's crashing constantly or getting locked up, you may have trouble with the performance of your computer. And there's several things you can do to help fix that problem. So down at the bottom left, you have the performance meter. If you click this, it'll bring up the performance monitor. As you can see right now, my CPU is running about 11%. Now I do have an on-screen recorder going. I've got a bunch of stuff plugged into this laptop here, but if I was up in the 70, 80%, you'd notice it getting yellow and red. It's very much struggling to process the audio. Now I've got my dropout protection set to maximum. If you lower these settings, you will be able to free up some more performance from your computer. Another big thing is what sample rate you're using. If you're recording at 96 kilohertz, you're going to put more strain on your computer than if you got it set to 48 kilohertz or 44.1. So keep an eye on your performance monitor. Another thing you can do if you're trying to keep all of your processing in place is that instead of using these big MIDI tracks right here, these virtual instruments, you can hit Command B. And what it will do is will bounce the MIDI track into an audio track. So all of your settings have been merged into an audio file, and now that virtual instrument has been disabled. That should free up some more space on your CPU. You can also go in and right-click any of these tracks and go to Disable Track. If you disable the track, that will then remove that processing power so it can be freed up for more tracks to be used. Throughout this video, I've been using the Inspector tab over and over again because personally I find that I just want to have the mix window closed out. I like looking at a big screen in front of me, and then I can go to the top left. And if you have the inspector view open, anytime you select a track, you've got kind of the shortcut version of everything you need to see within that track. So if I go up to the vocal right here, I have all of my vocal plugins loaded. I can add plugins if I need to. I can move the fader if I need to. And that is doing the exact same thing as if I grab the fader down here on the mix window. So open up the inspector tab, have it open on the left side of the screen. You'll be able to save yourself a lot of time from going back and forth to the mix window over and over again. Now, most of the time you're going to be recording in mono. So if I'm recording a lead vocal, I'm going to put a microphone in front of the singer, and that's going to go into my audio interface through one channel, and it's going to give me this mono track. Therefore, if I'm on a mono track, anytime I add plugins, it will be summed down to mono. So if I go in here to Presonus Studio One and I add an effect and I go to one of their reverb plugins, Room Reverb. Now, if I'm listening to this reverb and I've got it cranked, if I've got the mix knob up at 91% or so, if I listen to the vocal in solo, I'll notice that it's actually a mono signal. If I want to get the most out of this reverb plugin, I need this to be a stereo track. So one of the simplest ways to do it is kind of a workaround here is within your main audio region next to the track, you see where it says mono. If I click this circle right here, it will switch it to stereo. Now, the lead vocal that you recorded will always be mono. That is a mono signal. But what's happening is as it's going down your plugin signal chain, once it gets to a stereo plugin like the Room Reverb, I'm now allowing the reverb plugin to make this a stereo image. You should hear the vocal down the middle, but then we're getting all that loveliness that happens with reverbs. So now let's take a listen to the mono signal, and then I'm going to hit this switch on screen for stereo, and you'll be able to hear, especially if you got headphones on, you'll be able to hear that big wide reverb that you want to hear. Well, this city has my heart in lots of ways.
But that childhood still runs through my veins.
Super useful. Now, if you're using like a lot of the guitar amp plugin effects, like the Line 6 Helix native plugin, you definitely need to be making use of this little workaround because your mono signal guitar, you don't want it getting summed back down to mono. Just go ahead and click the stereo button again after you've recorded your track. All right, this next one's pretty fun, but visually, if you're looking at the screen and you really want to start seeing icons instead of reading all this text, at the top left of your timeline, you'll have this wrench tool. If you click open the options under visibility, you can click this thing for show track icons. As soon as you do, you've got these little squares here. If I want to go in and say, this is my acoustic guitar, I've now got options to add the picture of a guitar. I can go into the vocal. I can double click here, go down to where it has vocals. Got a lead vocal track right here. It just makes it easier, again, when you're looking at your session. Again, save it, make your own templates, and then you won't have to do this every time you're on a session, but it's a lot easier to look at than just going through and reading the text all day long. All right, next we need to talk about some of these cursor tools that I've been mentioning already. So at the top left, you have all your cursor tools available. There's a couple that I'm gonna use over and over again. Obviously, number one is like your smart tool. This is your mouse, which will gradually change to different items based on where you're at within the track. But the other ones I'm using a lot are the slice tool or the splitter tool. You hit 3 on the keyboard. This gives you this little knife. I can go in here and cut out these regions. I can do things like press Shift M to mute out areas where I have silences. If I need to clip gain any of this signal, I can use the 1 key, go to where it has this little white chiclet. I can bring this up and down as needed. Now, another way to access your split tool is to hit the command key on your keyboard. If I hold this down, I've now got the split tool. As long as I'm holding down the command key, I have access to the split tool. As soon as I let go of the command key, it will go back to the main cursor tool. So if you just need to quickly access it, but you don't want to commit to using the split tool, you can use it that way. If you want to change what your shortcut for the command key is on, just keep cycling through these different ones with the 1 key. So if I keep pressing 1, you can see it just continuously cycles through. I'm on the erase tool now. So if I hold down the command key, I can erase all of these audio regions. I can go over to the paint tool and I can start painting in some MIDI regions if I want to. All of that, I pretty much keep it on the splitter tool or slice tool over and over again, split tool all day long. All right, this next one is going to involve how often you're saving your session, and hopefully you have auto save enabled. If you hit Command, comma, it'll bring up your settings menu. And then under settings, you can go to locations, and then it has enable auto save. Now mine's set to 5 minutes, but if you're really paranoid about it, you can set it to every 1 minute. Just simply change it right here, and then make sure this is checked for enable auto save. Next, I want to share with you a plugin that comes with Presonus Studio One that you really need to make use of, especially if you're just getting started out, and it's not super clear what it does immediately. So I want to show it to you today. On any track that you want to add a plugin to, just go to add a plugin and go to your Presonus folder. There's one called Fat Channel. It's called Fat Channel, I believe, based on their Studio Live consoles. They would have this built into their mixers, but a Fat Channel is essentially going to have mostly every effect that you will need for doing simple processing. So here at the top, we have a high pass filter that we can easily access here. We have a gate plugin just to enable it. You just want to click the power icon. You can set it to whatever you need it to be. You've got a compressor icon that you can enable. Now by default, it's got this stock compressor, but if you click this downward facing arrow, you can load their version of an LA2A plugin, and you can load their version of 1176 compressor. Quite handy. The LA2A is one of my favorite compressor plugins to be using. Next, you have an equalizer, which also looks like the default equalizer that you get with Presonus Studio One. Next to it, you can change it to these different, like this is like a Neve style EQ. This is a Pultec style EQ. You can really get fancy with these, even if you don't have access to like the third-party versions of these plugins. Now the limiter plugin at the very end, just to give yourself a little bit of space, you can use this to dial in whatever sort of sound you want. But for all of that within the Fat Channel, it's got your low cut filter, your gate, compressor, EQ. You can swap the EQ and compressor if you want to. If you want one to go after the other, you can swap these easily around, just clicking this arrow. And then you have a limiter plugin as well. Pretty useful. Next, I'm going to talk about how you save your session. If you're done working on a song, most likely you're going to want to access it in the years to come. Well, a good way to do that is to plug in an external drive. And then instead of going through and just saving it like you normally would, select this option for save to a new folder. If you save to a new folder, what it will do is it will take all of those stems, all of those tracks that you've recorded. It's basically saving a copy of whatever session you have onto whatever drive. So if you're completely done with your song, it's very easy just to plug in an external drive, a USB drive, go to save to new folder, navigate to whatever drive you have plugged in, and then just save that folder. Then you can take that drive, you can put it in your closet, and then years later when you want to access this session, plug it in your computer and you'll be able to open up everything as it was. Now, when it comes to exporting your song, there's certainly different ways that you can get this done. Personally, I found just by setting the loop region, if you're in a hurry, you're just trying to get it out as soon as possible, just set your loop region to be a little bit beyond whatever your arrangement window is. So the beginning of your loop is going to be the start of your song. The end of your loop is obviously going to be the end of the song. Then you want to go up here to Song Export Mixdown. When you export your mixdown, you're going to have several different settings that you can tweak. So I've got this one set to, I'll call it the Georgia session. I'm gonna go down here to wave file. Your wave file is gonna be the closest to what you've been hearing in your session, but a wave file will also be a larger file size. So if you're just sending out a track, you want somebody to hear a demo and you need to be able to text it to someone, you can also check the box for MP3 file, have it set to whatever the sample rate of your song is, have it at a constant bit rate, and then have it set to 320 kilobytes per second. This will be a higher quality MP3, but just know that MP3 is vastly more degraded than what you'll get with a WAV file. So WAV file, I have mine set to 48 kilohertz, 24-bit. And I have it set to between the loop. That's why we set the loop region earlier to the beginning and end. It will export the cumulative amount of tracks that are in between the loop region. You can also, if you're using the marker tool in Presonus Studio One, you can have this set to start and end marker. Again, personally, I'm just setting it to between the loop. I want it to output the main output, and then I'm going to click OK. As soon as I do, it'll run its processing. It doesn't have to run in real time. I've never had any sort of issues with this quick mode of exporting, but you can certainly process it in real time if you want to. And then you'll have your session here, which is in a WAV file, also as an MP3 that you can share. Now, there's a lot we covered in this video, but there's also more that we haven't covered. Over on my channel, I've got plenty of videos on recording your first song from beginning to end using Presonus Studio One, videos on how to get the software installed, and more of a deep dive into each of these areas. So I hope you'll consider hitting the subscribe button. I want to thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.